Now you want to try to do this when you're not sweating. I'm a little sweaty now and I actually got the pattern a bit wet.
Hi everyone, this is Gwen and welcome to my channel where I share my sewing tutorials and sewing projects. Today I'll be sharing this little sewing project, which is a vintage inspired knit top, the Audrey top by Sew Over It. I'll be walking through my process of altering the pattern to fit my body and share some tips and tricks to putting this top together along the way. So now I'm going to show you how I modify the pattern piece for this top by referencing my own bodice sloper. You might recognize this sloper from the sewing tutorial where I did the small bust adjustment for the Simplicity 1426. I like how this pattern has marked out the bust line, the waistline, and the hip line. So it makes it really easy for me to get the landmarks and do the necessary modifications. So here's the bust line of my sloper and here's the waistline of my sloper. I have this little piece of paper over here as well, and this actually goes onto the half hip. It seems like this pattern actually goes to the full hip, which is the usually the biggest or rather the fullest part of your hip, for the lack of a better word. First of all, I'm gonna line up the bust line of my bodice sloper to the bust line of the pattern. And then I'm gonna see if the waistlines match up as well. Okay, so we have a little bit of a difference here. The waistline seems a little higher for this pattern, but I don't think that's gonna be an issue. So the thing is, I don't think I'm gonna actually want my top to go all the way down to my full hip. I only need it all the way to my half hip, really. This is where it's supposed to go for my half hip. This is my half hip line. And so I'm gonna measure the difference between this half hip line and this full hip line over here. So the difference between the full hip line of the pattern and the half hip line of my personal bodice sloper is about 4.5 inches. I'm going to make use of this shorten and lengthen line to help me with taking the excess off. So this is how much I need to take away. So I'm going to fold it and make the lines meet. And that's it. This is the new front piece for the pattern. So to shorten the back bodice piece, I'm not going to go back to using my own personal bodice sloper. Instead, I'm just going to make sure that the side seam of my front piece matches the side seam of my back piece. I'm going to lay the back over the front. The points here and here are aligned. And then just fold it down. That's pretty much equal. So this is my new back bodice piece. I like to pin the folded portion together instead of taping it down, just in case I need to make any modifications again after sewing the top. If you want to be really sure, you can also walk a measuring tape along here, the side seam of the back piece, and here, the side seam of the front piece, just to be sure. So the next pattern piece that I need to check is the sleeve. I have folded this portion down. So this is meant to be the 3/4 length sleeve, and the landmark that I'm going to be using to figure out how
how much I need to shorten and whatnot, are these points over here. They're supposed to go under your armpits. I'm just making them meet right here and then pushing it up. I feel like it's a little long still. I think I'm gonna chop off another inch. I'm gonna chop off just 1 more inch. The fabric that I'm using for this project is this cotton jersey which I found at an estate sale. I've recently also gotten into the habit of using a rotary cutter to cut my knit fabrics, and it's been life-changing. I highly recommend this for anyone who sews with knits. After modifying the length of the bodice, I ended up with a little bit of a notch along the side seam. I corrected this by simply running my rotary cutter through to make a smooth side seam. The stretch stitch function on my vintage Singer is a little wonky. I have just been sewing knits on this machine with little zigzag stitches. I usually go for about 2 millimeters in width and length. It's small enough to kind of act like a straight stitch, but also, give a little bit of stretch because it's zigzag. And now it's time to sew the top together. I started off by sewing the sleeves to the front of the bodice and then the back to the sleeves, just like the pattern instructed. It kind of looked like this at this stage. And you'll also notice that I'm doing this weird maneuver where instead of pulling the thread and cutting it at the end of every seam, I'm actually just continuing with the next seam because I'm trying to save thread here. All those little long tails that you get at the end of the seam, they add up to be quite a bit, and that's what I'm doing to save thread. The neckband design that I'm using for my Audrey top this time is the flat neckband, and I made no modifications to the pattern piece at all. Honestly, when I was sewing the collar, I was kind of nervous about how it would look, and I really wanted to do everything that I could to make sure that it would sit nicely on the top and on my collar. I aligned all the notches that are marked out in the pattern, pinned the collar to the neckline of the top, and then stitched them together just like the pattern instructed. This cotton jersey is a little stiff, so I ended up actually having a little bit of difficulty trying to pull the collar to have the length of the collar match up with the length of the neckline. I ended up with a little bit of puckers on the neckline, and I had to unpick certain sections just to make it sit flat. So my advice to you is really just go slow and take a deep breath along the way, okay? While this knit is actually stable enough for me to sew with just a regular foot instead of a walking foot, I still ended up having a little bit of a curly hem edge, but a little bit of steaming was able to fix it, and that's something you should try as well. When sewing the side seams together, I also practiced directional sewing. I sewed the side seam from the bottom all the way up to the armpits and then to the sleeve hem along the underarm seam. Directional sewing helps to make sure that even when there is a little bit of stretch, the stretch is actually in the same direction for both the left and the right sides, so you won't end up with the little wonky top because of the stretch in different directions. Finally, I top stitched the seam allowance between the collar and the neckline down and trimmed a little bit of the seam allowance off to reduce the bulk, and I was done. So overall, I'm pretty happy with how this top has turned out. I'm really happy that I modified the length of both the bodice and the sleeves, and the modifications have turned out to be perfect. I really love the silhouette of this knit top. If you are into mid-century, 50s, 60s type of style, I think this is definitely a sewing pattern that you want to try. I think the only thing that I would change when I make this again is the fabric selection. So this cotton jersey doesn't really have a lot of recovery because it doesn't have any like elastane or spandex in it. So I'm not quite sure how the collar will continue to sit with wash and wear. So you can see it kind of pops out a little right now, but it's not a lot. So we'll see what happens with time and I'll keep you updated on that. And also I'm not quite sure how I feel about this print. I feel like it might be just a tad grandma-y. I don't know, what do you think? But it's okay, it's kind of like a test top for the pattern. So I hope you found this video helpful. Let me know if you have this pattern, you're thinking about trying it, you haven't tried it, or you've tried it, and then let me know what you think about this top, and let me know if you think this print is grandma-y or not. And I will see you again in the next video. Bye!